Thank you, Srini. As a surveyor, a first disclaimer. I'm not an expert at the topic that I'm presenting. What I'm showing you here is just I'm sharing what I have learned. So don't consider that I'm an authority on shipping methanol, but at the same time I have done a few shipments and I thought I must share what I learned. So again, it's about sharing. The reason why I'm presenting this presentation is I was inspired after I saw Srini's presentation on how he has been showing in his slides that how synergy exists between different marine surveying operations, and that's when I told him that yes, looking at that, I can probably give a suitable presentation where the audience can think for themselves as to how different entities will have to synergize having to do a particular shipment or an assignment like this. And that is about this methanol shipments, risk mitigation through careful carriage. What is methanol? Well, the chemical formula for it, CH3OH, nothing but one molecule of carbon with 3 molecules of hydrogen attached to it, which in turn is attached to 1 molecule of oxygen and again 1 molecule of hydrogen. Various names that it is known by, we should be very careful because many a times it's not declared as methanol, it is declared as methyl alcohol or wood alcohol or wood naphtha. Whatever the names that you see on the screen, it is nothing but methanol. So many a times shippers do put in, I mean, it's a sort of a misdeclaration, but we as surveyors or we as people handling claims should be aware that methanol could also be called by these various names. Some vital data. Formula we know, CH3OH, density 791.8, boiling point 64.7, vapor pressure 13.02 kPa. Well, I'm not reading through all that, but pay attention to the MARPOL category, which is a marine pollutant. As per the IBC code, IMDG class 3, HNS class 2, 3 and 6. So it is a substance which can cause issues. So we got to be careful about that. Well, where is it used? The tables that are in front of you, MDF, plywood, methanol is used there. The paints that you see on the walls, methanol is used there. The ladies that are there in this room, the nail paint that is on your nails contains methanol. The water bottles that are being kept right onto your tables contains methanol. The sealants which are used on your windscreens in the windows, many more products would contain methanol. In fact, if you look at this picture, whatever is around you in this particular room and in your house or in your car does contain methanol in some form or the other. Methanol is almost used in every little industry. The names of the parts here are deliberately kept small because there's no point in reading them out. Just look at the picture and you know where methanol is a part of. Well, it's so useful, and it's not the use, it's also got its own hazards. Let us see what are those hazards. First is the fire hazard. It's a class 1B inflammable liquid. It's got a very wide flammability limits. Just note, right from 6.7% to 36% is the limits. It can readily burn into the ullage spaces into a cargo tank. Between 12 and 41 degrees centigrade, the concentrations of methanol vapor can be explosive when they come in contact with an ignition source. Methanol flames, by the way, are almost invisible in daylight. You just can't see methanol flames. It's not conventional burning. You can only detect methanol burning is by the heat that is generated, or probably the vaporization of the atmospheric moisture that gives you an indication that there is something burning there, or because of the heat, when the burning material that is besides methanol starts burning, that you actually realize that methanol is burning. So it's highly inflammable but can't be seen. So care should be taken about this. It's an environmental hazard. Methanol in concentrations anything above 1% in fresh or salt water do have short-term effects on aquatic life. So even as little as 1.1% or 1.2% could be harmful. It does have hazards as far as the medical side is concerned, exposures. There are no serious adverse effects from skin contact, but if there is a repeated exposure to methanol, which we'll see in the couple of next slides, it could be hazardous. So we need to educate our people who are doing shipments of methanol with the correct handling procedures. What are the exposure limits? It's a mild irritant, high vapor concentration or liquid contact with ice causes irritation, tearing and burning. This is the threshold limit. 200 ppm is the total time weighted average limit for exposure to methanol in an 8 hours continuous shift. It is not too critical, but if someone is very much exposed beyond this limit, could be a problem, especially the samplers. The people who go for sampling, we'll be touching upon sampling here, but if people are not doing sampling in a proper manner, they could be exposed or rather overexposed to methanol, which could be hazardous. We got to take care of that. Ingestion. Methanol taken by mouth may pose a serious threat. 1 to 4 ounces of methanol have been known to cause fatalities. Procedures are the same as for inhalation. But we need to take care of this and ensure that the surveyors or the samplers or whoever is going for methanol shipments is well educated of this aspect. Having seen the hazards, let's now come to the actual shipment of methanol. Tankers, as per the convention, it's either an Annex 1 tanker or Annex 2 tanker. For methanol, it is always Annex 2, IMO Type 2 or Type 3 tankers. I'm not reading out the entire text because if I start reading out, I'm going to extend much more than 30 minutes. But for methanol, it will be Type 2 or Type 3 tankers, which will have inert gas capping into the tanks. That is very necessary. The latest IIMS amendments, like MSC 34091, which were adopted in November 2012, specify detailed requirements for methanol, which says the tank should be internal tanks, the ventilation should be controlled, means there should be an inert gas capping, the gauging should be restricted. That is, we got to have hermetic gauging. If there is hermetic gauging, obviously the sampling also needs to be hermetic sampling, but not many times people follow that. They do an open hatch sampling, which can lead to increased exposures. Care should be taken there. Having seen that, many times people say, okay, I don't have a nitrogen plant, I've got a flue gases inert gas plant, fine, that's okay. But as far as methanol is concerned, the flue gases will set the methanol off spec, whereby at the discharge port, despite of having an inert gas capping onto the tanks, onto the cargo, your cargo samples are going to fail in the PTT test. PTT test is the potassium time test, which is one of the most vital tests as far as quality of methanol is concerned. We'll be touching that upon as well into the next slides. There are normally 3 grades that are traded in the order of increased purity. That is the fuel grade, grade A, grade AA. One thing that I must tell you here, when I'm mentioning carriage of methanol, I'm only mentioning carriage of methanol as cargo and not as fuel for engines. DNVGL has actually done quite a lot of work. It's available on the internet. If you go onto the RENA magazines, if you go onto the tanker magazines, there's quite a lot of detailed write-ups on how to carry methanol as fuel. We are not touching upon that. We are just touching upon methanol as cargo. The common contaminants for methanol include water, chloride. It could be from the tank washers or the sea washers coming, leaking through the tank domes. Hydrocarbons, ethanols, aromatics, that is benzene, toluene, styrene and phenol from either previous cargoes or however they come into the tanks. Having said that, there are some particular restrictions what kind of tank coatings would be suitable for carriage of methanol. As in this table, you can clearly see that apart from epoxy, almost everything, all other types of tank coatings, phenolic resins, zinc, polyurethane, rubber lining, stainless steel are acceptable. Absolutely right. But I would say, out of my own personal experience, is even phenolic resins sometimes do have problems, because epoxy and phenolic resins, they have a different absorption and desorption rates. By this, what I'm saying is, when you're carrying an hydrocarbon cargo as a immediate previous cargo to methanol, when you're doing the tank cleaning, you do the wall wash, you may find that there are no traces of previous cargo. That is only momentary. As you start carrying the cargo, the tank coatings actually start leaching out the previous cargo that is trapped between the cargo coatings into methanol, thereby contaminating it. So that's my own experience, but the book says epoxy is just not acceptable for carriage of methanol. Next comes is the carriage preparations. Well, a lot of master mariners here, correct me if I'm wrong, there is nothing that emphasizes the carriage preparations, tank washing, the wall wash sampling, wall wash sample analysis. But the crux here is, how do you take wall wash and how do you do the wall wash sample analysis? Again, as I said, I'm not going into the very, very detailed process of analysis. We will touch upon the analysis, but we will see what are the do's and don'ts rather than seeing into the process of analysis. Well, as far as tank washing is concerned, we have laid down procedures after this cargo to this cargo. What is the tank cleaning procedure? That obviously would be followed. But before taking any wall wash test, ensure that the tanks are fully dry. Do not allow any surveyors or any inspectors to go into the tanks for a wall wash sampling if you find your tanks are wet. Wall wash must be taken from 4 areas. Pardon, anyone said anything? Wall wash must be taken from 4 areas of each of the 4 bulkheads. That's the standard method which many surveyors follow. And that's why I have specified it here. But ASTM E2664-09A specifies only 2 areas per bulkhead and no more than 2 meters high and each up to 15 to 20 centimeters wide. That is what should cover as your wall wash sample. So ideally, no more than where you can put your hand high up there and collecting the wall wash sample down below there. Many people go on, I have seen, and we have come across issues where we have been appointed by the clubs where the surveyors or the inspectors wanted to take wall wash samples from 10 spaces or 10 different locations onto a bulkhead, which is not the regulation or which is not the guideline. Wall wash samples from corners do not count as standard samples. Many a times, especially when there are commercial considerations involved, you need to fail the ship. These are the tricks adopted, that you go into a corner and take a wall wash sample from there. Yeah, I'm not trying to defame anybody here, but I'm telling this is how it happens. It does happen. So the corner samples are not considered as standard wall wash samples. So we can simply refute, we are not accepting corner samples, because the ASTM table, ASTM guideline doesn't specify them to be standard samples. The ship's officers must always accompany inspectors or chemists taking wall wash samples. So if you're acting on behalf of the clubs, many a times, or rather most of us do, this is one thing that we must ensure, that the ship's officers always go with the shipper's surveyors or the shipper's inspectors down there for collecting wall wash sample to ensure that it is being done as per the laid down procedure. Again, the samples to be collected as per the ASTM guideline there, which I described earlier. Some pictures, some right ones, some wrong ones. Can we identify what is right and what is wrong based on what we just read out in the couple of last slides? On to the left is the chief officer who is following correct procedures for taking samples. He is wearing gloves. He is washing his gloves with methanol to ensure there is no contamination of the samples being collected. Look at the shoes. They are with a throwaway cover, so that his shoes are not contaminating the already cleaned tank. The bottom picture onto the left, that's the way the actual wall wash sample should be collected. Now look at something which is to the right. Do we see a corner there? Would that be a standard wall wash sample? In my opinion, no. Similarly, at the bottom, there is something which the chief officer is doing wrong. He knows, you all can see and appreciate the condition of the tank there. Look at the lower bulkhead of that corrugation there, lower part of the corrugation. Can we see some salts there? Here? See what the chief officer is trying to do to ensure that these salts don't come into his sample. He's trying to be very selective as to from where he's taking the sample. He's just sort of doing something like this, which is again wrong. I mean, this is just an illustration, again, as I said, only to show what is right, what is wrong. Then comes, once you have collected these wall wash samples from the tanks for every individual bulkhead, composite them, come to the CCR or lab, whatever it is, and carry out a test for each tank. The most vital test, as I said, is the permanganate time test, which is called as PTT. What is this PTT? Here, potassium permanganate solution is added to a part of the wall wash sample, and the color fade off time from clear to orange or straw yellow is measured. We'll see how is it done. It's nothing but a comparison of colors. The tube on the left, the Nestler tube on the left, which is pinkish or purplish in color, is a standard solution, which is, it's the test solution in which you have taken the wall, it's about 50 ml of wall wash sample and 50 ml of potassium permanganate. And to the right is the standard solution to which you have to monitor the fade of color. The sample, if contaminated, will turn from pink to the straw yellow in a specified time, and you've got to measure and monitor that time. What is that time? Now let's see the procedure quickly. You take a 50 ml stoppered cylinder with wall wash sample, fill another 50 ml stoppered cylinder with pure lab methanol. I will touch upon this, why pure lab methanol in a while. Keep the cylinders in a water bath maintaining 15 degrees centigrade. This is very important. You have to ensure that the samples and methanol both come to 15 degrees centigrade before you add any potassium permanganate to it. When the temperature of the sample reaches that, what we require, add 2 milliliters of potassium permanganate to both the cylinders, and from this time, set your stopwatch and determine how much time it takes for the samples to turn straw yellow, which we saw in the last slide. The sample standing time of more than 50 minutes is satisfactory, means the samples pass. What does it mean? That if you have put potassium permanganate into a sample which has come to 15 degrees, start the stopwatch. If the sample does not turn straw yellow, similar to the specimen sample or the reference sample, in 50 minutes, it takes more than 50 minutes to turn to a straw color, means the samples are passed. There's no reason to fail that wall wash sample. Now remember, I said we have to take some pure lab methanol along with the sample. The reason is pure lab methanol will turn to light straw in 60 minutes. So that helps you determine whether that potassium permanganate solution that was used was of the right concentration. The concentration is 1 gram to 500 milliliters of DI water. That's the concentration. If anything stronger or weaker, the results will vary. And this is one picture which is showing you, or rather by which you will be able to appreciate what will happen if a stronger solution or a weaker solution was used. Now you see these tank numbers, starboard 1 port, 2 port, 5 starboard, 4 port, 6 port. The samples at the bottom are of entity A and the samples at the top are of entity B. Both the entities are using their own potassium permanganate solutions to carry out the test. The Nestler tube in the center is the standard solution for reference. The samples at the bottom are the ones where the concentration of potassium permanganate is perfect. It's correct as required. Whereas the samples on top, the potassium permanganate solution is a bit stronger. Now you look at the color of the sample of 2P on top and 2P at bottom. The 2P at bottom has failed the test and gone much more paler than the reference sample, whereas the 2P is yet showing pass. The reason here was, whoever was using those chemicals in the top samples was using double the concentration to prove that the wall wash samples are passing the test. And this is where lab methanol will come in play. If you have a lab methanol, it is known that lab methanol will turn pink to straw in 60 minutes. So if your lab methanol, even after 60 minutes, is not turning pale, means the concentration being used is wrong. And that's the importance of having that lab methanol along with your samples. You should do that test at the same time. Some precautions: the apparatus must be clean. Fresh KMNO4 solutions should be used. Ideally, they say so. I'm not a chemist, but the chemists say so that ideally potassium permanganate solution should not be more than 3 days old. But it's a little difficult. I mean, as surveyors, we don't get methanol tankers every third day. So it is better to prepare a KMNO4 solution right when you want to actually do the test. Maintain samples at 15 degree. Test purity of methanol against lab methanol. So the cargo too can be tested like this against the lab methanol. Some other test. Color. Color is again comparing the wall wash sample against a standard AFA5. Now AFA5 is again a Nessler tube with a standard solution. I'm not going into those details. I mean, AFA numbers increased in increments of 5, 10, 15, 20, so on. But AFA5 is the standard clear water-like appearance. If your wall wash sample looks like AFA5, it passes. It's just a visual test. Suspended matter or a Tyndall test. It's nothing but to check the suspended matter. You simply take 2 Nessler tubes, shine a torch from below. If you see suspended matter, it simply fails. Hydrocarbons or a Tyndall test. In hydrocarbons, it is nothing but take equal amounts of wall wash sample and same amount of DI water, put it in the tube, shake it vigorously, allow it to stand for about 20 minutes, and if there are hydrocarbons present in the sample, they will froth up and come onto the surface. If there is a froth on the surface, there are hydrocarbons present, it fails the hydrocarbon test. Chlorides or silver nitrate test, we all know either it could be done by a chromatography test or you could have silver nitrate solution, whatever it is, but it's simple. We may not to emphasize on that. We all know how to do that. This is a typical picture of a suspended particle test being carried out. Now you can see the difference between the test tube on the left and the test tube on the right. Test tube on the right has got quite a lot of suspended particles as compared to the one which is there on the left. And what he's holding down below is nothing but a torch. Well, tanks are cleaned, wall wash test passed. Time to relax? Gentlemen, not yet, because we have only seen one part of it. There is still something which we haven't seen. We don't know what are the precautions or what are the anti-contaminations or risk mitigation processes being followed here at the time of manufacturing. As surveyors, probably we don't know this. We do not know what are the conditions of this particular piece of equipment, the shore pipeline. If we are doing it for the shippers, probably yes, you have supervised the cleaning of the pipeline, or it's a dedicated pipeline. But if you're doing it for PNR or if you're doing it on behalf of the ship, we have no access to this particular area. So what happens here? So what do we do? We have ensured that no contamination happens on board. How do we ensure this? And that is simply by sampling. Sampling of products like these cannot be underestimated or underemphasized. You have to sample them very, very, very meticulously. And everywhere in sampling, again, the ship's crew has to be a part. Many a times, or rather, most of you will agree with me that 80% of the times, load port samples are not supervised by ship's officers. It's only that someone comes to the master or the chief mate into the cargo control room, says, these are your tank composite samples. How many times have those chief officers deputed people to actually witness whether they are genuinely tank composite samples, whether the composite samples have been made on board and presented as they should be? Very few times. This is one area where ship's crew should be told to specifically witness sampling. Sampling at load port. Again, I'm brushing through. Draw a manifold sample, first foot sample, individual tank samples, composite samples. I mean, many a times here the terminals play around saying we can't stop the pumps for the first foot sample or for the manifold sample. The back pressure can't be taken by the pumps. True, it may happen if there are screw pumps, but then in that case, what do? Establish this with the loading master. If we are acting on behalf of the ship's interest, probably we know the local knowledge, what this terminal has, what this terminal doesn't have. We must advise the ship's crew, master, ship's chief mate, that this may be the scenario. So you should be able to loop the cargo to some tank till the time you take the manifold sample or whatever that process is. But as surveyors, that local knowledge of ours should be passed on to the ship to ensure that these all sampling methods are done absolutely pronto. As we said, we saw in the IMO regulations, the gauging should be restricted. If the gauging has to be restricted, the sampling too has to be restricted. But many a times, at least where I was involved, there were very few, or just about 20% of the cases, if I put the statistics, about 20% of the cases, a hermetic sampler was used. Otherwise, most of the times, it is always open sampling, which means adding contaminants to the cargo by way of sampling ropes, by way of unclean samplers, etc., etc., etc. By the way, methanol is also very, very hygroscopic, so if it's left open, it can start absorbing atmospheric moisture in the right kind of conditions. If the atmosphere contains, and it's a rainy season or it's humid, it can start absorbing moisture very quickly. So it's ideal to do a hermetic sealing, a hermetic sampling. But this comes with its own problem, because hermetic samplers are very difficult to clean. You can't really go into that tube and ensure that it's been cleaned. So it's always better to have dedicated methanol samplers. Doing a sampling with a hermetic sampler is much more better than the open sampling. Discharge port sampling, again same. Sampling has to be witnessed by ship's officers, the individual tank samples, the manifold samples, the shoreline jetty end samples, shoreline terminal end samples must be seen by all who are representing the ship's interest. Secondly, what is also important, when it actually comes to claims, I think probably Nigel and Tina would advise me and guide me on that. When it comes to claims, many a times ships do not have recorded evidence of sample distribution or sample receipt or sample disposal. It is very important that the ship's crew be advised to maintain proper records of what samples have been received, by whom, of what, when. It's very important, because tomorrow should something go in litigation and say the owner wants to prove that these indeed were never drawn in front of the ship's officers or they were never drawn on board. If he's got a proper log of sampling that is done on board, and they do have a sampling log, I'm not saying that they don't, but they don't maintain it regularly. If they can maintain that log, if we can advise them to maintain that log, this would go a long way should there be a litigation at some stage. Precautions during sampling, again we all know them, we'll just brush through. Determine the mode of sampling, whether it is closed or open. If it's open, it is always better to advise the master to issue a note of protest, or at least document that the receiver surveyors or the shipper surveyors have requested for an open sampling. It shouldn't happen that the receivers tomorrow accuse the vessel that you opened the tanks, the nitrogen envelope was lost, hence A, B, C, D, E, F, G happened. If they are requesting for an open sampling, please ask them to give it in writing. If they don't, let the master document it. Ensure sampling apparatus is clean. Again, as I said, simple basics, but worth recapping. Ship's officers to witness all sampling. Record all samples drawn, distributed and retained. I just explained you why. Some do's and don'ts. Check the cargo compatibility. See what is the previous cargo. If the previous cargo was hydrocarbons or aromatics, simply say no. I mean, I know it's not in a surveyor's scope to say no, but it is always still better to advise the principals, whoever they are, that previous cargo is hydrocarbons or aromatics, and this could cause A, B, C, D, E, F, G problems. We may not be the ones to decide whether to take that cargo, but if we are asked, we should certainly tell the principals that this could be a potential problem. Check, and let me correct here. I know of masters who have carried hydrocarbons and aromatics as the previous cargo and carried methanol successfully without any problem. I mean, there are ways to do it, but only if they know how to do it. Check tank coating compatibility. We just saw that chart. Ensure a thorough tank cleaning is done. Human element here plays a big role. If the people who are doing tank cleaning are not aware of the properties of the cargo, of the properties of the tank coating, if that is not emphasized to them, then probably they may not do a proper job. So it is very important to keep that. Again, it's not the surveyor's purview, it's not in the surveyor's scope to do this, but it matters that if you are going for an investigation, did the crew know that this is the previous cargo and this is the next cargo? Do they know the technicalities that would go into the whole process? Do they know what are the typical characteristics of this cargo? It's very important. That's why I'm saying human element plays a very big role here. Have a wall wash kit available on board. This is always whenever I go to the ships, when I'm doing methanol, I always advise that the vessel should have their own wall wash kit. That way they have a way of cross-checking what the shore chemist or the inspectors are doing. Whether they are, as we saw that, the concentrations, whether they are being used right or wrong. Have a stock of fresh chemicals on board. Agree on the type of sampling, open or closed. Avoid crew changes between load and discharge cycles. Ship's officers to witness all sampling. Again, we've spoken about all this earlier. If an issue is foreseen, intimate the P&A clerk. Better be safe than being sorry. That's it, gentlemen. A quick one. Any questions?
Thanks, Milind.